This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. The Huskies Warming House podcast is also brought to you by the Soda Pod, home of MNCAA college hockey news and more. Stay wild and up to date with new episodes throughout every week. Find them on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and other podcast platforms. And welcome in the Huskies Warming House podcast, episode 179. Nick, Max, and Noah Grant here for another week in the den. And Nick, what a week it is. This is finally it. It is game week for some St. Cloud State hockey here. Women's hockey on the docket. Nick, I cannot wait. It's going to be absolutely awesome. Oddly enough, though, we are previewing a women's hockey team, but it is not the St. Cloud State women's hockey team.
Whoops.
It is who we have at number one in the conference. So definitely look out for this group. But we're going to start, of course, with talking about St. Cloud. They get their first exhibition games under their belt. We can't wait for them to get rocking and rolling, Nick. And I don't think any more needs to be said. We can't wait to talk about it. So without further ado, Center Ice View News and Notes presented by HuskiesIllustrated.com and the Soda Pod. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com. Episode 179. Noah Grant alongside Nick Maxon here in the den. And Nick, like we said, starting on the women's side pretty much for the whole show, basically, but we'll start on the St. Cloud Granite City side of things here before we go cross country for the number one team that we have placed in the WCHA. This St. Cloud State Huskies team gets their first taste of action against Union College, Nick. Now, it used to be the Union College Dutchmen. It's not anymore. It's the Garnet Chargers, the new nickname, which Nick said pre-show that's a mouthful.
Well, it is. It's just, and honestly, like, it's not striking a fear in the eyes of the opponent. Just, I don't know. Like,
yeah, is there a number of letters or syllables before a name becomes less threatening?
there probably is, honestly. If it's not, I don't know, short and sweet's, the right way to describe it, but if you have to take like almost like a full sentence to talk about the mascot, it's just too long. And I don't know, like, I don't even, what is a Garnet Charger? Like, what is that? That's what I want to know. Like, is it a lightning bolt? What the heck is this thing?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. And I was trying to figure out too, I suppose we could have done more research, but that would be silly, right? Very curious why like Dutchman didn't feel. So, I mean, they used to kind of be called the Garnet and the Dutchman. So it kind of used to be interchangeable. But then wouldn't you think they would be the Garnet Dutchman then instead of the Garnet Chargers? Like when you're...
That's Susie logic, Noah. That does not have a place on this podcast. So knock it off.
What does have a place, though, is their women's hockey team is challenging St. Cloud at the Herbrooks National Hockey Center, September 23rd, this upcoming Saturday, 3 p.m. Central Time. And then on Sunday, of course, 1 p.m. Central Time on the 24th. So your first hockey action, the women will be off the week after and then play the 6th and 7th against Mercyhurst. So they'll have a week to kind of debrief and figure things out and get things ready. This will be an interesting matchup, East Coast, West Coast, so to speak. See how the WCHA fares against Union, which, is maybe not the strongest team, but certainly will prove to be an interesting test, especially for a lot of these incoming players for St. Cloud. We won't give away too much about the group because the next time that we talk about the women's program, we will be previewing the St. Cloud State women's hockey team in full in a couple of weeks. But Nick, I mean, when you get ready for an exhibition game, especially for some freshmen, even some returning players, it's against an opponent that, again, like we said, is non-conference. They're coming across the country. You're in your own building. What do you expect out of the weekend? And if you're head coach Brian Idalski, what are your expectations? What are you trying to get out of the weekend?
You're doing an evaluation, right? Because, let's not forget that this St. Cloud women's team had a bunch of turnover this past off season, right? A lot of freshmen that are coming in, a lot of transfers. So you're looking to see where folks are at in terms of, as the X's and O's, really. What are the defensive pairings? What's that chemistry looking like? Especially for Idalski, his expectations, right, is, of course, defense first, right? That's what got him the 18 wins last season. Again, tied a club record for most wins in a season. And honestly, no, I know that we've hyped this up in different seasons in the past, but your non-conference schedule sets the tone, right? So you're looking to see who's got the jump, are ladies going in, are they forechecking in the right systems? Are they being in the right spots without the puck, right? So it's those little details from a coaching perspective that you're watching. And for the athletes, right, is, how much do you want it, right? Are you skating like this is essentially, a WCHA playoff game? He wants to see the effort. He wants to see the commitment to the defensive side of the puck. So you got to go out there and give it 110% with Idalski every single shift. As we saw last year, he was not afraid to mix things up game to game as well as in the middle of the game. So if you're not going to show the fire on the ice, he can certainly warm the bench if you're with Brian Idalski, which is a good thing. Again, a big reason why we saw some of that turnover, as well as we saw a big jump in the wins margin, which 18 over the previous three, I believe it was a combined 19 or 20 wins. So, I mean, to think about it, what he's doing is working, and you want to see that trend continue upwards from the end of last year.
Yeah, certainly would agree. And obviously, like we said, the 23rd and 24th, Saturday, Sunday, they play. Just a friendly reminder, by the way. So October 3rd, a week from that following Tuesday, that's when we'll preview the St. Cloud State women's team. I mentioned Tuesday because on the 26th, the upcoming following week here, we'll be recapping the women's games from this upcoming weekend. And also we'll be moving our show recordings and recaps to Tuesdays from here on out. So now that we're live into the season, Tuesday releases are what you're going to be seeing. We don't really want to try to go any later than that, but have to give us some time with work schedules and time to kind of debrief the weekends as well too. So yeah, this women's program, Nick, I'm very excited to see what they can bring to the table because, I mean, they're a group that we've been excited about, a little bit of roster turnover, but a lot of exciting things to have be looking forward to, especially with this freshman group, hopefully going to make some noise here and see how they fill the void essentially in their first time in the Cardinal red and black. I mean, it's very exciting. Anything else you want to add about the women's program here getting ready for Union?
Yeah, I want to see really what the offensive side of the puck looks like. Brian Idalski through the freshman class as well as through the transfer portal picked up a lot of good offensive skill with this program. We've talked about it last year too, that the defensive side was there. Right now it's, can you add a little bit more of that counter punch, a little bit more of that offensive skill set to put the puck more in the back of the net? I think there is a really good chance that with some of these freshmen and definitely these transfers, there's an opportunity to see a spike in goal scoring. So I'm really excited to see how the offensive side morphs this year while maintaining that consistent, steadfast defensive positioning that they are known for under Idalski.
Absolutely. Lots to debrief upcoming next week here where we get our first taste of St. Cloud State women's hockey action. If you're in the Granite City, go to the games. Absolutely. Definitely. Yes. Fill the seats at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. Huskies hockey is officially back this week. A big test for the women's program on the St. Cloud side that they will be facing coming up here as well is the team that we have picked to finish first in the WCHA. Our final WCHA preview not involving the Huskies, coming from OSU Ice Arena that seats just under 1,500. It is the Ohio State Buckeyes who topped the WCHA last season with 70 points, 2 points ahead of the Minnesota Golden Gophers and a full 10 points shy of the Wisconsin Badgers, who, ironically enough, found success against the Buckeyes when it mattered most in the final game of the season last year. Nick, recapping last season statistically, regardless of the results and the frustration, this Ohio State team had a very, very good year last year.
They really did. As you mentioned, finished first in the WCHA with 70 points. Gophers were right on the tail at 68 before it dropped off a little bit, but they were essentially the big team in the regular season, again, finishing first. How about this for a record, Noah? 33-6-2 overall. If you thought that was impressive, how about this? 23-4-1 in the WCHA, again, regarded as the best conference in women's hockey. You could not beat this team at home. In fact, 16-1-2 at home, 15-4 away, which is still pretty darn good. Neutral ice, 2-1. Non-conference was essentially they didn't lose a game. They were 5-0-1, so they had a bit of a tie there. And again, the only really big loss that they have was to Wisconsin, 1-0 in the national championship game. So that was big. And then, of course, against our St. Cloud State Huskies, how about this? The Huskies did get one away from them, right? 4-1 against St. Cloud. But at the end of the day, this Ohio State team, very, very, very good.
I didn't up that. St. Cloud definitely got swept by Ohio State.
I was going to say that.
Although I will say,
what you're doing here, Caleb Peabody would be very happy with you making me look like a freaking idiot. So,
well, some would say you do it naturally, but. Anyhow, I digress. January 21st, the Huskies did get a point, though, an overtime loss, 3-2 for the Huskies against Ohio State last season. Now,
you just missed the O in the middle of. Okay, got it.
Here's what I'm saying. Trivia question here for you, Nick. Who is the only team to beat Ohio State at home last season? Who do you think it was?
Oh, was it Duluth?
It was not Duluth. It was the Minnesota Golden Gophers, October 28th. They lose 4-2, and then they beat the Gophers 5-4 in a shootout the following night. So a great weekend of hockey in the WCHA, as they usually are. But of course, those top end teams tend to bring the heat. But like you said, this was a group that started off red hot, and they never really looked back. And in fact, even their hiccups were few and far between. Oddly enough, though, late November, a 4-4 tie against Colgate in a non-conference matchup, which was something to bring surprise. Duluth, the Bulldogs, you are correct, though, in assuming they did actually beat Ohio State 5-4 in overtime at the start of December, actually on my birthday, December 3rd. And then February... I don't. You know what? When I was younger, I was excited about birthdays, and now after I turned 22 and now I'm almost 27, let's go backwards in time with that one, I think.
God, that's your attitude now. Wait till you get to my spot, buddy.
That's what I hear, and I'm and I'm a nurse, so I feel like things are going to get more jaded as we go very quickly here. But you go a full 2 months later, Minnesota beats them again, 4-2, and they lose to Wisconsin 6-5 in overtime in the month of February, and then they don't lose again until essentially the WCHA championship, 3-1 against the Gophers. And they come back, great success in the national tournament, and a 1-0 loss in the national championship game to Wisconsin. But other than that, Nick, victories all across the board. I mean, they started their season, let's see, what would it be? 2, 4, 6, an 8-game win streak. And then after they had their little bit of a hiccup, they win 4, they tie, and then they win 2 more. A loss there, but then they win, oh my goodness, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 games in a row before their next loss, Nick. Win another 3. Drop 1 to Wisconsin in overtime, win another 4 before their loss in the WCHA championship, and then win 2 more en route to a national championship game. I mean, that is a successful season. And I think that what's interesting about this, Nick, and we'll get to this team only got better over the offseason, which is
a lot better, actually.
Terrifying.
On papers. Holy cow. Yeah, it's one of those deals where, when you've got a program, and we talked about this in Wisconsin too, right, where you've got a coaching staff that, the athletes want to play for, you're clearly showing that you have a model of success and you're getting to, the ultimate prize, right? You had a national championship game. Yes, you fell short 1-0, but that's a close game. You're going to attract players that are freshmen, you're going to attract transfers, and at the end of the day, you can kind of get to pick and choose who you want to come on board, right? So they're in a really good spot, and we'll touch on the roster, some of the subtractions, of course, as with college hockey. Every year is a bit of an upheaval, some more than others, but as we mentioned, as we're gonna touch on later, what they did get in return this year versus the transfer portal and the freshman group is just downright nasty.
Yeah, it definitely is. Now, the challenge for us here, by the way, normally we're able to view essentially the upcoming roster for the season and be able to kind of anticipate. So for the thing with this Buckeyes group is there's a lot of seniors that are moving into either graduation or their graduate season. So it's kind of hard for us to tell who's going to be staying and who's not because their website is actually down. Same with talking about the coaching staff. So we weren't able to get any additional information at this time. Nadine Muserall in her 7th season, 157, 67, and 19 for a 685 winning percentage head coaching wise. But other than that, unable to add any additional information, Nick. So why don't we talk about those individual leaders, by the way? A lot of seniors, like we said, dotting this group, top 4 seniors. Yeah. I mean, you're talking point ranges anywhere from the 40s into the high 50s. Certainly a very successful season.
Yeah, it all starts with Jennifer Gardner, right? 21 goals, 36 assists, 57 points in 41 games. No, that's just ridiculous. Basically 1.4 points per game, 131 shots on net. I mean, you talk about someone that's driving the offensive, essentially force for the Buckeyes. She was a big part of that. So was the person right below her, Sophie Jocks, a defenseman, by the way. 24 goals, which led the Buckeyes in that category, 24 assists, another 48 points. How about this? 241 shots from a defenseman. Which also led the club in that department, right? Again, to the next 2 more seniors, right before you dip into a sophomore, McKenna Webster, who also had 39 points in 31 games, mind you. So what we're seeing here is, again, these top ladies, about a point per game or better throughout the season. So the question that we have then, too, is, who can replicate these numbers, right? And we'll talk on the additions. We think there's going to be some that might, but also with the COVID years, right? Some of the things and questions that we have is, are some of these ladies taking a 5th-year option, moving into our graduate year, right? There's some of the questions we simply just don't have the right answers yet. But either way, let's just say that all of them still are just done with hockey. What they have coming in is just, again, going to
Yeah, certainly is. And Nadine Muserall, of course, the former Minnesota standout, by the way, will have them prepared and ready. What's also interesting, too, if my math serves me correct, which generally it doesn't, so take it with a grain of salt, I believe this is our last upcoming group of COVID-eligible groups, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, because this is like the senior year on the Husky side for like Vieti Miettinen and stuff, and he was part of that first group in the bubble. So, but I mean, you talk about this group as a whole, what they're trying to replace, right? Very exceptional. Think about this, Nick. When tied after periods 1 or period 2, they were 9-0 collectively. So even if you had them deadlocked, they were finding victories. 24-0-1 and 28-1-1 when leading after the first and second, respectively. That's pretty darn good. And when trailing, they were able to still find 5 victories across the total contest as well. Power play clicking just under 33%. That's pretty good. 34 for 104, and a PK that's just at 83% to boot. If you didn't want to add insult to injury. The thing that surprises me, Nick, outscoring their opponents basically 169-71. So I mean, almost 100 is the differential.
Good Lord.
Now, if that didn't seem scary enough, how about this? Just so I can get the math correct here.
Be careful.
Their shot differential was 850. To put that in perspective, their opponents had 860 shots. So their opponents had 10 more shots than the differential that they added. So talk about almost doubling up on shots. 1710 to 860. 4.12 goals per game compared to 1.73 against. Nick, do you think this team probably was able to produce 10-3 in 1-goal contest? We know how the last one in the season ended. I mean, this is a team, and we had the conversation that I picked Ohio State to go all the way. They lose 1-0 in the national championship game, and we kind of had the banter about Wisconsin, how we should have picked them, that sort of thing. And you had talked about it. I mean, there was certainly an argument to say that this Ohio State team was an absolute wagon, and if they continued rolling down the hill, I mean, it certainly was going to be impressive. I mean, anything else you pull out from their team statistics? Because, I mean, this is a slate that I'm just going to tell people right now, this is about as good as it gets. They gave up an average of 22 to 24 goals across the first, second, and third period combined, and they scored at minimum 52, 51, and 63 goals respectively. Like, if you got this team to overtime, which their goal differential was 3-2, like, you were pretty lucky.
Yeah, but it also shows a little bit of a roadmap on maybe what their weakness is. You talked about the penalty kill, only 82.8%. That's not the worst we've seen for sure, but it's also not the strongest, right? And in one goal games, 10-3, that's still pretty good. But let's look at some of the things that you said they trail, right? So when they led 24-1 after one, after two, 28-1-1, basically unbeatable. And then when they trailed, they didn't trail often. But when they did, there was a chance there, right? There were 2-5-1 when they trailed after two, and then 3-6-1 when they trailed after one. So it mimics another team that we talked about with this. That was the Gophers, right? Which is, these teams that are powerhouse offensive teams, they like to play with the lead. They like to get out a quick strike, maybe 1, 2, 3 goal lead. And it's not that they sit back, but they then are just in cruise control, right? If you can sort of limit the first period attack by these teams, you give yourself a chance, right? Again, they didn't trail often, but those numbers aren't necessarily fantastic in terms of the wins and loss columns right in those situations. And it's almost like if your specialty teams, especially in the power play, if you can get them almost frustrated, there was an opportunity to get something behind them because their penalty kill, again, not the worst, but also maybe not the strongest as well. So it may be with those, low scoring games. And again, when you've got teams that can skate, these two teams can skate like a bat out of hell, right? Between Wisconsin and Ohio State, it shows you how these teams love that open ice. And when you take it away from them, it's tough on them. And even when we talk about how good the WCHA is, the one reminder that I think you and I will be on the same page is you have a top 4, maybe top 5 this year, aka St. Cloud. But then there's a little bit of a gap, right, between 6, 7, and 8. And with that gap, at the shall we say, the offensive prowess is pretty remarkably different. So you do kind of wonder with, playoff come time and some of these, we talked about before, it comes down to coaching. Ohio State's got plenty of talent, but there is an argument to be made there with these teams at the top that if you can keep them close and keep them frustrated, they just seem to prey on that dominant factor. And if they don't have it, you can almost sort of catch them off guard. And St. Cloud did it a couple times against other opponents in this conference.
Well, like we had kind of had the conversation with some of these top teams too, is they don't play in tight games necessarily all that often because of their dominance. So when you get them matched up against each other, or you have the surprise in recent years that Duluth on the women's program has, and suddenly they become a force and a surge to be reckoned with. Suddenly then when you win games 7-0, 7-1, and then you're thrust into a 3-3 hockey game after 2, things get a little bit more challenging, although they were unbeaten when they were tied after 2. So maybe not the greatest stat, but I mean, if they're trailing by 1, sometimes they weren't able to find that crucial goal. I mean, go back to the national championship game. I mean, you got to score a goal to win a hockey game. You can't lose a game 1-0. And like I said, Wisconsin, a very great program, very great team. Mark Johnson, well coached, obviously, in terms of what they bring to the table. But you got to find a way. You got to find a way to execute. You can't have your top scorer have almost 60 points in the season, and then you can't find the basket once in a national championship game. I mean, that's kind of just how it goes. I totally agree with you. And it just lens to the question too is we've talked about how important, like, for example, goaltending is in the WCHA, and it is important because it can win you a national championship, or as we've seen in St. Cloud's case in recent years with Sonia Hola, Jojo Chobak, Emma Paluzny, Janine Alder. Like, when you have good goaltenders, they'll keep you in hockey games, but at some point you got to realize the goaltender can't put a puck in the net. At some point the goal scorer's got to do what they do.
And some of that, Noah, is trying to be too cute, right? Because when you get some of this skill, and these two teams have got high skill, right? Ohio State has got arguably on paper the most skill in this conference, a big reason why we have them at number one. But sometimes in a championship game, right, you try to do a little bit too much. Maybe you make an extra pass when in reality, we saw this on the St. Cloud men's side, right? It was the simple, the grease pan goals, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that's what it takes, is that you have to, almost when games are tight, and it's you're never going to make the perfect passing play, because these two teams also defend really well. They watch tape, right? They understand your tendencies. And so sometimes it's just as simple as getting the puck through from the blue line, but then also be willing to get into that dirty area and fighting and battling for a rebound, taking the vision away from a goaltender, right? It's not always pretty when it goes into the playoffs. And sometimes that's the difference is, can we get away? I shouldn't say get away, but can we take advantage of what's there versus trying to force what our game plan? I know it's made us successful, but if we're not being allowed to do that, can we adjust, and can we just simplify things and then just do simple hockey? But maybe it's a little bit more of a gritty type effort versus a skill-based effort. I think that's the difference between maybe some of these squads up top.
Well, and we've talked about it at the National Hockey League level too, is some of these goal scorers, especially these guys in the NHL who are shooting 90, 95 miles an hour, they get these pucks down below the tops of the circles inside the dots, and they're trying to make that extra pass. And sometimes it's like, put a puck on net. You're in a scoring area. You're in a high percentage area. And I think, getting goal scorers to become naturally adept at being willing to be a little bit selfish sometimes, putting pucks on net, turning around and shooting from awkward angles, things that catch goaltenders by surprise through screens in high scoring areas. I think that's
a pop play, right? A pass off the pad, right? You go far, pad low. There's always going to be a rebound there. And to your point, right, as a shooter mentality, right, you're always you're trying to beat the goaltender, right? But sometimes you forget, you get that puck off quick. Sometimes a surprise, maybe you don't score, but maybe the goaltender has to react late and it's off the glove. There's still a loose change in front of the blue paint there. Those are the type of situations that you have to almost anticipate, especially players without the puck, right? In those situations, to be able to get down, have strong hands, put some weight in your stick, and whether it's to either force a couple of jabs through the goaltending's pads, or maybe you do find a way to kick it out to the one side or the other to an open line mate out there too. So sometimes it's just simple little heads up plays too.
And it doesn't even have to be, you don't even have to necessarily touch the puck. Be around the net, create havoc, draw a defender to you, create a screen, things that just like, if you want to be a goal scorer, you got to go to where goals are scored, the middle of the ice, down near the paint. You've got to create those opportunities. And let me tell you this, if you're Ohio State, who I would imagine has got a bitter taste in their mouth, having such great success and not getting it done in the ultimate game, when you lose a game 1-0, you best believe that those games are won and lost by that grit. Goals in those type of hockey games are scored just like that. Second and third chance opportunities, shots through screen. They're ugly. They're not pretty goals, but they all look the same on the score sheet. Speaking of score sheets, Nick, by the way, we've got 3 forwards and 2 defensemen that are headed on their way out from Ohio State. So why don't we start there? 5 ladies who will not be returning next season.
Yeah, Emerson Jarvis was a freshman forward, played in 20 games, had 3 points. Gally Levy, another freshman forward, just played in 5, so got 1 single assist. Jamie Grinder, a sophomore, just played in 2 games, had 2 assists, so it was a point per game player, respectively. Sydney Moreau, a freshman defender. She played 34 games, so played a good majority of the season, had 8 points, 3, 5, and 8, so more of a shutdown role. But as we will talk about more in depth with Ohio State, this is not really the role or the fit that they want of the defenseman, right? They want a little bit more, shall we say, two-way, a little bit more offensive punch to their game. And is it Elena Gianpietro or Pietro?
Gianpietro, yeah.
Gianpietro, yeah. So didn't play a game for Ohio State, so she moves on. Not quite sure
she's headed to Robert Morris. Sydney Morrow is headed to Colgate. Jamie Grinder is headed to Maine, and then Brown and Quinnipiac, respectively, for Levy and Jarvis. So, but yeah, Nick, we've talked about this as well down the line. They add Boston College's leading scorer and a former Team USA participant. Former Team USA Olympian, 2 U18 players for Canada and Team USA. Oh, and then, probably the best player in recent years for Mankato, by the way, and a Quinnipiac standout that notched over 40 points. I would say the additions and we haven't even gotten to the freshmen, but I would say
Nice.
the additions in the transfer portal, Nick, you've got 4 graduate players soon to be, and then 2 seniors on the bottom of that list. I'd say things are working out pretty well.
I would say so. So let's do a real quick recap, right? Hannah Bilka coming from Boston College, 41 points, right? 12 goals, 29 assists as a forward. Kayla Barnes, also coming over from the Eagles, played 36 games, 19 points. A little bit more, shall we say, offense to her game. Steph Markowski, if you want to talk offense from the blue line, 32 points with 9 goals, 23 assists for Clarkson. And then, as you mentioned, Kelsey King, who I've had a chance to call a couple of games with her at St. Cloud against Minnesota State, 19 points, but 14 goals, which is third best on this list for coming from the transfer portal, Noah. And then, speaking of this, how about Kiara Zanin? No, not Greg Zanin. No, not that. This is a forward. How about this? 26 goals, 23 assists for 49 points coming from the Nittany Lions of Penn State. That's a really nice ad. And then Olivia Mobley coming over from Quinnipiac, as you mentioned, 43 points to boot with 15 goals as a forward coming into her senior season. So, wait, was there not more firepower that we were talking? No, I'm kidding. That's crazy. And again, you kind of wonder too, as you mentioned, that after that loss 1-0, that I almost get the sense, and this is obviously being joking there, just in case any Ohio State women are listening, especially the coaching staff. You kind of wonder if that zeroed that goose egg up on the national champions. Like, we need more. It's like, we need more. I forget the movie reference that is. It's the Matrix. The second. Yeah. Like, more, and this is more. They want more offense. Well, they're getting it from the transfer portal additions, and no, we're not even hitting the freshmen yet. And let's just say their accolades are not far off from what these women are.
Yeah, certainly not. And I mean, when you're adding, first of all, starting with Joy Dunn, Jinsey Dunn's sister, by the way, I mean, that's not too shabby. You know, the pedigree that's going to be coming through there. Obviously, not hard to find statistics on elite prospects, but again, I think, that's just, again, a pedigree that speaks for itself.
Apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? So
yeah, it definitely doesn't. Gold medalist, World Juniors type thing. Another forward in Delaney Fleming, 110 points and 143 contests for Shattuck St. Mary for her, by the way. So that's some great production, and not the biggest player, at 5'4", but certainly, again, we talked about those water bug players that are able to find those areas. Again, we've talked about how that adjustment needs to be made now at the Division I level. You have players that have to be able to find that nose for the net, have to be comfortable. There's some tall defensemen in the WCHA that you have to be able to handle. Forward Jordan Baxter, her and Jocelyn Amos, the fourth player on this list, both forwards who were both on the U18 World Junior teams for Canada, a couple of medals for them. Jordan Baxter, a point per game player at Delta Hockey Academy Prep, by the way, and then 85 points in 61 contests in the OWHL for Jocelyn Amos. So, I mean, you look at a couple of players, and by the way, just to clarify, for Jordan Baxter, flipping back to her, in terms of that production, 80 points in 59 games, 52 of those goals. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. Talking about players that are able to bring that offensive punch, that offensive production. I mean, I think it speaks volumes here. Again, I think goaltending is one of the most pivotal positions when it comes to the WCHA, and certainly Ohio State has great goaltending too. But at some point, if you're going to be a team that's going to match pound for pound in the WCHA, you cannot be afraid to have high punch offensive talents, players who are game breakers, who can turn a game on its head at any moment. I think all of these gals, I mean, when you're talking even about the transfer portal, and I mean, you can talk about the strength of Clarkson, Penn State, Quinnipiac, where you have a defenseman with 32 points and then 49 and 43 on the forward side. When theoretically, point production wise, Kelsey King is your quote unquote weakest addition. I mean, Kelsey King was a standout player for Mankato, and brought some really great offense, and is, if anything, a great middle six player for that program. Maybe a third liner if things shake out in terms of production. I mean, this group, regardless of how many seniors they lose, they're going to be returning some. There's no way they're not. The freshmen are going to be great additions. And then, as we talked about, I mean, you have the goaltending to boot. I mean, you have You have two senior goaltenders and a junior goaltender had a 9.61, 9.14, and 9.12 respectively. GAAs of 0.6, 1.81, and 2.03. You know,
That's pretty good.
things are looking up. And for me, what I garner here, and again, there could be more additions or transfer things that we're missing here. But like I said, two seniors and a junior, I got to imagine at least one of those seniors is coming back. And the junior, Amanda Thiel, played in 26 contests, the most out of any netminder. So, I mean, if your GAA is under 2, you have a save percentage of a 9.14. And I mean, you allowed only 46 goals across 26 contests. I mean, add that with the firepower they're getting, Nick, I would say there's a reason we have this team at number 1. There's no doubt about it.
No question. And, the offensive side of the punch is something we focus on because, again, that seems to be where this team is being built around is the offensive punch, the speed and the skill set. But remind us to that over the past, 10 years, Noah, that the game of hockey has really sort of transitioned to be that offensive minded, right? So when you talk about some of these shutdown defensemen that went on to other schools, right? It's not that they're bad players, but Ohio State just isn't looking for that. That's not what fits their mold right now. And maybe that is something that with this team, as we saw with their goals against by period and certainly the shot differential, right? It seems to be working really well for them. So for those who say, okay, well, do they rely on goaltending? Maybe partially, right? Because again, we talk about goaltending stats and how they're really a reflection of the team in front of them. You can be, but one thing that this Ohio State group does really sort of, shall we say, advertise for them is, sure, you can score all the goals and the assists that you want on the offensive side. I don't care if you do that if you're not going to play good, solid positional hockey in your own zone. And we see that with their team numbers, right? So you can, shall we say, not have look at the Gophers, right, with Justin Close on the men's side, right? You don't have to have the most skilled goaltender behind you. I'm not taking anything away from Justin Close, but you can certainly make things a lot easier defensively. And with that speed and skill, you create a turnover and you can transition the puck well and rapidly. Good night, Jim Kite, right? It becomes a very tall task for your opponent when you're able to just counterpunch and control the pace of play in every single zone on the ice. So there really isn't a weak spot for this squad, right? And it really only becomes to what we discussed earlier, and that is, say you have that one off night that just you're not getting the bounces, or maybe the goaltender has your number, right? That's where maybe the hole in the proverbial armor is.
It's interesting, Nick, by the way. The Ohio State website just started working again moments ago.
You don't say.
How does that sound?
How's that for timing?
Yeah, very much so. So Quinn Kuntz, by the way, in net will be returning for her graduate season. Kayla Barnes on the back end. So if you have your stat sheet up, Nick, obviously a lot of notables. Kelsey King, like we talked about, transferring over. Jennifer Gardner, Kenzie Hausworth, Hannah Bilka, which we talked about. She's a transfer. Stephanie Markowski, Amanda Thiel, Kira Zanin, Lauren Bernard, Olivia Mobley, Riley Brangman, and Julia Bugliani, Michaela Webster, Hadley Hertmetz, and Reagan Kurt, all rounding out the seniors and graduate players respectively. Other than that, Nick, no juniors on this roster, by the way. So other things to kind of look forward to. Like I said, there could be more additions as we go. But again, things to kind of keep in mind here. One of the things that I think, when you talk about Ohio State too, when you lose a lot of that scoring punch as well too, and you're trying to supplement it, sometimes you got to kind of, if you've ever seen the movie Casino Royale, which is a fantastic movie, you got to be all in at some point. Like Ohio State recognizes that their potential deficiency might be a little bit defensively, might be defensive responsibility. They know they've had adequate or above adequate goaltending. They realize that they can be comfortable being in a track meet. And I think that reflects, what Nadine Museral brings to the table. Peter Lander, by the way, is the associate head coach, by the way, over 20 years of coaching experience, and was added last season. So, was originally with Ohio State during 2017, 2018 is when he was here. Winter Olympic participant in Beijing back in 2022. was at the women's hockey program at the University of North Dakota prior to her initial entry for Ohio State. So his initial entry, I should say. This Ohio State team has a chance here. Now, as we've talked about, how will these transfers and these freshmen assimilate? That's always the question. It's a big question mark, for example, for the Golden Gophers. Wisconsin has dipped quite a bit in the transfer portal too. Ohio State, no exception. I mean, in your mind, as you look at this list, Nick, what's going to keep them at number one as far as those transfers and freshmen getting up to speed here?
It's going to be, honestly, and you talk about assimilation. I think what helps is, the Boston College, good program, right? I know we can talk about the strength of the conference, but that's a well-coached program. Kelsey King is no, shall we say, stranger to the WCHA, right? But the one thing that Ohio State and, shall we say, teams like Wisconsin and even the Gophers have done, when they have dipped into the transfer portal, when they get freshmen in, they're the right fits. And so their assimilation isn't as, shall we say, high as a mountain as maybe other squads that, might have as big of a number turnover as we see. And this Ohio State team has got great senior leadership. So you're not going to be putting, shall we say, freshmen in situations where they won't succeed, right? So even if you have these transfers coming in, they're again, I feel like, Ohio State has the ability to kind of be a little bit picky in the situation. And I feel like it's going to be a seamless fit. So I really don't see a challenge with this, really. The challenge that I see is more of, can they replicate those kind of numbers from last year, right? We talked about the numbers earlier. Those are borderline, almost, shall we say, unsustainable type numbers, right? We talk about the shot selection and, the shot numbers, the goals for versus goals against, right? And they know that they have maybe some work to do on special teams a little bit, especially on the PK and power play. If you can go back-to-back seasons over 33 some odd percent, that's just nasty. But it really comes down to, okay, well, can we when the time comes right? Because again, I think this team knows regular season is not where they're going to judge themselves, one, but also be judged. It's how can we as a team adjust and do things and win games maybe in a different way that will get us to the ultimate prize, which is a national championship. I think that's really the next step for them. And that's why you have so many senior leaders here. That's why you have maybe a bit of a different mix. But you're also trying to essentially accentuate your greatest skill set, which is your offense. So I don't know. I don't see it as, this big turnover for them just because, again, they're well coached and the teams mates that they have coming in are again, they're no stranger to college hockey for the most part. I feel like it's going to be a little bit of a learning game for the team itself, like anybody else in the first couple of weeks. But come WCHA time, the team is going to be a train, not just a wagon, but a train that's going to be almost unstoppable.
Yeah, and they've got great goaltending to boot, and I think that that's always a piece that is a welcome addition for them. They start their season with only 2 games before they get to the WCHA, and they'll be on ESPN Plus actually the weekend after that they get ready after St. Cloud starts their opening exhibition against Union. September 29th and 30th, they play Colgate, and if you remember, like we all do, Colgate, of course, made it to the NCAA quarterfinals, lost 4-2 to Wisconsin last season. So that'll be a marquee matchup. That one's going to take place at Colgate, Hamilton, New York. Again, the 29th and 30th. Then they get right into it with the WCHA matchups. They travel to Duluth. They have a week off and then travel the 13th and 14th of October to face the Bulldogs. Very curious to see how that matchup shakes out. We'll get a good litmus test as to where both these teams are going to be at here. Duluth, again, has an interesting schedule where they are going to be a great marker for both St. Cloud State and those top 3 teams. They bridge that gap and kind of let us know where we're at here. And then the following weekend, they travel to St. Thomas. So they start with 4 on the road before hosting the Golden Gophers at the end of October for spooky season, as the kids say. And then we go to November where they travel to Bemidji State, have a week off, and then host both Wisconsin November 17th and 18th, and then St. Lawrence over the holidays at home, the 24th and 25th. And then they continue their what will be an 8-game homestand. Games 5 and 6 are against some team, I don't know, called St. Cloud State, December 1st.
Girls, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. So some team from the Granite City. I'm not really sure. Although I'm trying to figure out how this is supposed to shake out because they have both games listed on December 1st, which would be very odd to me. The second one is at 5 o'clock at night, so I would be most confused if they played a double header on that
Yeah.
Friday. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I suppose we could probably pull up the St. Cloud women's website and see how that tracks. But nonetheless, they finish off the first half of the regular season. Ohio State does at home against Mankato. So, Nick, to recap quickly, Duluth, St. Thomas, Minnesota, Bemidji, Wisconsin, non-conference against St. Lawrence, and then St. Cloud and Mankato. What do you think about that schedule for the Buckeyes after they open up their exhibition games against Colgate?
Again, like you mentioned, there's an early litmus test again against Duluth, which we talked about could be, shall we say, a team on the rise. They have been a team on the rise, so it could be a good little test to see where teams are at, right? Then Ohio State, St. Thomas, they should handle them, and then you get right to the Gophers, right? So it's kind of this on and off, difficulty, and again, not taking it away from Bemidji or St. Thomas, but essentially it's gonna test their emotional well-being, right, a little bit, because one thing good teams do, and we saw this with this team last year, is that you don't write the schedule, but you have to approach every opponent as if they're Wisconsin, right? You got to take them seriously. I don't expect Ohio State to do anything less than that, but you do kind of wonder, especially with an 8-game homestand, you eventually or usually pay for it in the second half. Can they take advantage of a home schedule? As you said, they only lost 1 game at home during the regular season all year last year. So I expect them to be in good shape after that first half and can be rolling as we head into the post-holiday schedule here in 2024.
Yeah, friendly reminder, by the way. So it is December 1st and 2nd, Friday, Saturday, like we anticipated. The game on that Saturday, the 2nd for the Huskies and Ohio State will be at 2 o'clock Central. Friday night's matchup is at 5 o'clock Central, like it was noted. Like you said, second half of the season, they start off with a bang here. January 12th and 13th, they go to Ritter Arena to face Minnesota right out of the gate. Good matchup as the Gophers host there. And then they host back in Ohio State, Minnesota Duluth that following weekend. Weekend after that, they travel back to Minnesota. It's a bit of a Minnesota flip-flop, so to speak, for them. They play the Huskies for the second time on that weekend, January 26th and 27th. Although, again, the WCHA website has them both on the same day. So, again, I'm going to go with probably not. Yeah, definitely not. February 2nd and 3rd, they host Bemidji State at home and then travel back to Minnesota again, Mankato, the 9th and 10th of February. And then they host a Minnesota team in St. Thomas at home and then finish on the road, one state closer to home against Wisconsin before getting ready for
a heck of a regular season finale, huh?
Yeah, definitely could be a marquee matchup a couple weeks after that in terms of playoff time. So, Nick, second half of the schedule here, getting ready into tournament time. I mean, what do the Buckeyes anticipate? I mean, that, like you said, that Wisconsin matchup's going to be good, but certainly some really tough bookends with Minnesota, Duluth, and Wisconsin on the ends of those.
And how about that travel back and forth and back and forth? That's people forget too sometimes that as an athlete and as a organization, right? That it's your same airport, you're probably going to get sick of MSP after probably a couple of weeks, but that's a lot of traveling back and forth. But it's not as road heavy as I thought it was going to be, considering the 8-game homestand in the first half. But you do wonder, over time, does that maybe get a little bit lethargic for the players, right? As we know that as we head deeper into the hockey season, things get a little bit tougher. Things get a little bit, shall we say, the energy maybe isn't quite always there. But again, Ohio State showed this last year. They had a 10-game winning streak in the second half. They had a couple of blips here and there, and I don't expect really anything different. Again, there's some tough tests here with the Gophers and St. Cloud. I don't believe, as I look through this again, I'm thinking out loud here. No, they do. Yeah, again, the Gophers and the Bulldogs to start off the second half.
Yeah.
If you're the Buckeyes, you wouldn't want it any different, really, right? Because you get about 3 to 4 weeks off in between the first and second halves of the schedule. And it's a good way to just get you right back into it, right? You would hope that the holiday break isn't that long, but again, that's college hockey for you. And it'll be good to get them back in the saddle against 2 tough opponents right out of the gate. I think, again, for Buckeyes fans and for the players, that'd be more preferred than, say, maybe a different opponent in the WCHA.
Nick, you're a St. Cloud hockey fan, and you're anticipating a first half and a second half matchup against these Ohio State Buckeyes. If you were looking for the latest news and photos of your favorite Huskies, any idea where you might head, by the way?
CenterIceView.com.
Yeah, it'd be great. Maybe some Huskies Illustrated. And, Nick, if you're feeling frisky, as we move into the winter months, if you want to stay wild and up to date with all things in the state of hockey, you should also check out the Soda Pod, our great sponsor of the Huskies Warming House podcast. Back to the St. Cloud side of things, though, and the women's program. They face Ohio State 4 times. It is on 2 separate days for each of those weekends. Don't let the WCHA lie to you. How do the Huskies handle the gauntlet that is the former #1 team in the WCHA last season?
Got to find a way to slow them down, right? And it seems like a broken record. It's no different than handling the Gophers or Wisconsin, right? You got to figure out how to slow them down, especially out of their own zone. You really do have to protect the middle of the ice when they're on the forecheck, and you got to figure out a way to develop and sustain your own forecheck, right? These teams thrive off of turnovers from the opposing forwards and then a quick transition up. They're a quick strike team. Again, Ohio State can skate. They're one of the best skating teams in the country, if not the best skating team in the country. Again, they throw a lot of pucks on net. So can you keep them to the perimeter? Can you keep them into the lower, shall we say, danger areas? And then more so, pucks do come through. Can your goaltender swallow up and not give up a rebound? And more so, if there is a rebound, can you get it out of that danger area to the sides or maybe get it clear? Just take what you're given, right? But I do think it's going to come down to the areas in front of both nets, right? Can St. Cloud maybe create a little chaos in front of the Ohio State netminders? Yeah. And if you can, maybe buy yourself maybe sometimes in the extra session, right? We talked about the PK, not the worst, not the best, but it seems like if you can keep things close, again, if you are within a goal after the first 20, you got yourself a chance against this squad. So to me, it's almost like you have to come out throwing punches against this squad in the first 20. The counter to that, Noah, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is that you can almost run around a little bit too wild and maybe tire yourself out. But I do feel like with some of these teams, you can intelligently, sort of put some pressure on these without, shall we say, draining the gas tank too early in the first 20 minutes. That to me is the key. I'm curious to your thoughts on how you can take down a very dangerous Buckeye squad.
Totally got to be willing to filter pucks in front of the net and solve a netminder. There's no doubt about that. Create some chaos. But really, I think where the game is won and lost is the transitional play in the neutral zone against these teams. I mean, you have to be willing to limit the offense against at the point of attack, meaning right at the entry into your own defensive blue line. You have to find a way to keep them, meaning Ohio State, to the perimeter, to the outside, and not letting them essentially get a free ride into the zone and set up shop. You have to make every puck contested coming across your blue line. If you let this team set up shop, then you get to a point where when you're in your own defensive zone, if you start running around, you're in trouble. You also have to be willing to defend from the middle outward. You have to be willing to protect the house and let the perimeter play be what it's going to be. As soon as you open up a lane in the middle of the ice, this Ohio State team is going to make you pay, and they're not going to look back. And then obviously on the other side, this is a team, again, a high-end team you have to be opportunistic with. You have to be selective in your rushes, creating depth and making sure that, one, you're alleviating pressure in your own defensive zone. But then once you're on the attack, being willing to hang onto the puck, keep possession, create opportunities, cycle plays if you have to. If you have to chip and chase, it is what it is. But I'd say being willing to threaten the middle of the ice on the offensive side. And like I said, take opportunities, take what the game gives you. And then if you can create second and third chance opportunities, maybe get a cycle going, maybe get a forecheck going, pop a couple. I mean, they showed success against this Buckeyes team last season. Now you just need more sustained success if you're St. Cloud State getting ready on the women's side.
Yeah. And I think, when you talk about transitional game, it's all in the back checking forwards, right? If you can allow your D to step up at your own blue line and force them to give up the puck, right? And you've got forwards that are coming back hard through the middle lanes and then essentially pick up a loose puck and then transitioning back that way. That's huge, right? I know that Brian Idalski will have that pegged as far as a major contributor to being successful defensively, especially again through the middle of the ice. And, it's going to be, like you said, a track meet with this squad because of how quickly they can get up and down the ice. And as you mentioned, if you got the puck on your stick, you try to threaten the middle, but also when you're coming through the blue line, on the rush, coming back through layers, right? Make sure you have that middle drive, someone coming through, and that's where you can activate your defensemen too, right? One thing with Brian Idalski's system that I want to see a little bit more this year, and we started to see it towards the end of last year, is the defenseman joining the rush. Not be afraid to take a chance that way. Now, you got to do it. You got to pick your right spots. You got to know when the right time is. But if you can maybe cause an odd man rush and a turnover, don't be afraid to go up there and have your forwards push the defenseman back, open up, or maybe even, like you said, take away the goaltender's vision.
Yeah.
And you come right down Broadway as a defender. As long as you got one person back, go ahead and take that chance, right? I think that's one of the areas that St. Cloud can improve on. I think they do have the personnel to do it. We'll touch on that more as we preview them. That would be another great way to turn defense into offense under Idalski's system and try to take down a very formidable opponent in the Buckeyes.
Yeah, fight fire with fire, and a great template and a program to look at is Ohio State. Great defensive activation in recent years, and some really high-scoring defensemen and high-scoring defensive freshmen and transfers that they're bringing in as well too. I shouldn't say transfers because they're all forwards, but I mean nonetheless. Excuse me, the transfers are defensemen, the freshmen are forwards, but nonetheless, easy for everybody to track there, quite obviously. Another team that is a high-flying offensive team with some good defensive activation is the DU Pioneers. They will be our next preview coming up next week, Nick. And then, if you're a Huskies fan, the moments you've been waiting for. The following 2 weeks will be our final previews as we wrap up the preview to hockey season, as it's already kind of started for these programs here, the women's team, and then the men's side. We're excited to bring you that coverage as we continue on the Huskies Warming House podcast. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the den.
Here, one-timer, come in, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores. Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it. He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real. Welcome to the NHL. A game winner.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.